Hello and welcome back to World 360. How has the UN Security Council's call for a ceasefire in Gaza hurt relations between the US and Israel? Why did the Indonesian military offer a rare apology? We answer these and more in today's episode. First up, US and Israel. Why are tensions rising between these two allies? Well, most obviously, these are tensions stemming from the war in Gaza, which has claimed tens of thousands of lives. It has put pressure on the US to ensure this doesn't result in a spillover of the war into the region, as well as the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Gaza. But things reached a head earlier this week when the UN Security Council passed a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, which came after several similar resolutions failed passage in the Security Council since the war broke out. Let's remember that there are 15 members in the Security Council, 5 permanent and 10 non-permanent. The US, being a permanent member, has vetoed a few resolutions like this before, but this time it abstained from voting, arguing that the resolution failed to condemn Hamas. And therefore, the vote was passed by 14-0. However, the US abstaining from the vote still irked Israel's top leadership. Reports emerged that Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu cancelled a trip by an Israeli delegation to Washington, a trip President Joe Biden personally requested a week ago. Before the UN Security Council vote, Netanyahu threatened to pull the delegation if the US did not use its veto, but it seems he followed through despite an abstention. Though American officials say these issues will still be discussed in different channels and by other officials, it is yet another example of the increasingly fraught dynamic between Netanyahu and Biden. Let's not forget that prior to the Gaza war, Netanyahu and Biden weren't exactly on the best of terms. For example, Biden didn't invite Netanyahu to the White House for many months, unlike the usual convention for a sworn-in American president to invite an Israeli leader. Months after assuming office, Biden did invite Netanyahu to Washington, despite the fact that this was around the time when the US wasn't all that happy about Netanyahu's proposed judicial reforms in Israel, which had triggered massive protests across the Middle Eastern country. And therefore, this frosty relationship between the two leaders, plus the war in Gaza, has only added a strain to the bilateral relationship. Of course, Biden has not abandoned the US's unwavering support for Israel, which has been consistent in the US's Middle East policy since 1948. The US has also provided Israel roughly $4 billion annually in military aid. But even this special relationship between the nations is increasingly being put under strain. Recently, the Pentagon chief didn't mince his words in saying the civilian death toll in Gaza was, and I quote, far too high. He said it in a meeting with Israel Defense Minister Yoav Gallant in Washington. And this trip still took place despite Netanyahu cancelling a trip by US officials to Israel. Some media outlets say the Israeli Defense Minister Gallant was traveling to Washington to request more expedited weapon shipments. And this comes at a time when the US Congress couldn't find consensus, or rather it failed to pass a resolution on additional aid to its allies, including Israel. In a piece titled, "Israel is a Strategic Liability for the United States," analyst John Hoffman points out that Biden has been unable to leverage the US's special relationship with Israel. Israel has demonstrated no long-term political strategy in Gaza beyond the systematic destruction of the enclave and killing of its inhabitants. Netanyahu, whose support has reached all-time lows and who faces growing protests calling for early elections, seems to know that once this ends, his time in power is over. Biden has been either unable or unwilling to leverage the special relationship with Israel or sway Netanyahu, who has previously boasted of his ability to manipulate the United States, Hoffman wrote. For our second topic, we're looking at what caused the Indonesian military to offer a rare apology. Earlier this week, the Indonesian army apologized and said it had arrested 13 soldiers, that's 1-3, after a video emerged showing a man being tortured by Indonesian troops in the country's Papua region. Now, Papua is a province comprising the northern coast of Western New Guinea, together with island groups. There, armed separatist rebels have been operating for decades. The Papua province enjoys special autonomy as per legislation passed in 2001 and is a resource-rich region. It is also one of the most underdeveloped provinces in Indonesia. The main population are ethnic Papuans in the center of this province, while coastal towns are inhabited by descendants of intermarriages between Papuans, Melanesians, and Austronesians, including other Indonesian groups. And in a video last week, graphic footage showed a Papuan man, a native, a local, being tortured by a group of men wearing army trousers who had kept him in a barrel with his hands tied. The video sparked widespread outrage in Indonesia, and native Papuans urged the Indonesian government, police, and army to follow law and order rather than torturing civilians. This action is against the law, tarnished the name of the military, and disrupted efforts to handle conflicts in Papua. I apologize to all Papuan people and hope such an incident won't happen again, said Major General Isaac Panjamaman, a military commander in Papua. The military has also claimed that the tortured man was a member of a Papuan separatist group. Now, last week, a deputy chief of the Indonesian presidential staff said, "While we hold a strong hope that our soldiers are not involved in such reprehensible acts, if proven true, the individuals responsible must be held accountable in accordance with the applicable rules and regulations." Now, if we revisit the 2001 legislation passed by Indonesia that gave special autonomy to the Papua province, one of the key clauses states, "The Papua community as God's creation and is part of a civilized people who hold high human rights, religious values, democracy, law and cultural values in the adat, customary law, community, and who have the right to fairly enjoy the results of development." For our last topic, we're looking at why Brazil and Hungary are sparring. After the emergence of key CCTV footage, it appears former Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro hid for 2 days at the Hungarian embassy in the capital of Brazil, while police were allegedly on the lookout for him. Earlier this week, the New York Times obtained security camera footage from the Hungarian embassy, which showed that in early February, Bolsonaro stayed at the embassy while facing an investigation that he and his aides had plotted a coup after Bolsonaro lost the 2022 presidential election. Bolsonaro is named in various ongoing criminal investigations and perhaps sought refuge in the Hungarian embassy as he cannot be arrested at a mission that welcomes him. Technically, diplomatic missions are legally off limits to domestic authorities. Now, the incident has not only prompted the Brazilian police to launch an investigation, but also the Brazilian Foreign Ministry to summon the Hungarian ambassador to explain why Bolsonaro spent 2 nights at the embassy just 4 days after his aides were arrested on suspicion of plotting to overthrow the Brazilian government. More so, Bolsonaro admitted to staying in the embassy for those 2 days. He told Brazilian news outlet Metropolis, "I won't deny that I was in the embassy." However, reports are now emerging that he told Brazil's Supreme Court that he had no reason to have sought asylum at the Hungarian embassy. Let's not forget that last July, Bolsonaro was barred from running for office for 8 years after he was found guilty of abusing his power and misusing public media during his 2022 election campaign. This ended any possibility of political comeback in the forthcoming 2026 election. One important point to mention here is Bolsonaro's camaraderie, friendship with Viktor Orban, Hungary's president. Bolsonaro, who served as Brazil's president from 2019 to 2022, shared close and friendly ties with Orban. In fact, in February 2022, while visiting Hungary, Bolsonaro referred to Orban as his brother. Thanks for watching. This is Pia Krishnankutty for ThePrint.